This is Space Minds by SpaceNews. In this week's special CEO Series edition of Space Minds, we're at the World Space Business Week in Paris. In today's episode, SpaceNews editor Mike Gruss talks with Mina Mitry, CEO of Kepler Communications. But first, a short video from our CEO Series sponsor, Black Sky.
Hello and welcome to the Space Minds podcast in partnership with Black Sky. I'm Mike Gruss from SpaceNews and we're recording here in Paris today at World Space Business Week. We have a series of CEOs and leaders we're chatting with this week, and today I'm very pleased to talk with Mina Mitry, CEO of Kepler Communications. Thanks so much for being here. Let's start with the show itself. What are you listening for this week? What kind of conversations are you hoping to have, and what are you hoping to glean from the meetings that you're having?
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show, Mike. I'm super excited to dig in. And this is a really exciting time period, I think, mostly because this particular week, we're really seeing the proliferation of optical communications. And the industry at large has been waiting for the technology to mature for a few years now. And we're kind of at this pivotal point where we're seeing a lot more deployment, a lot of folks that are proliferating towards the SDA standard, and really listening in for those who have made their design trades and decisions of will they be flying SDA compatible terminals or looking for interoperability downstream, and how will they be using optical communications to really reimagine their business altogether.
Let's start with an announcement that you guys had earlier this month. Walk us through that, and it was well, you tell me. I want to get the details right, but help me walk me through these details of the recent test that was announced earlier this month.
We're extremely proud and couldn't be more delighted. In partnership with the Space Development Agency, GA, General Atomics, we were able to put together a demonstration where we flew our spacecraft overhead and had an aircraft use an optical terminal to route data between our space segment and the aircraft back and forth, routing gigabytes of data regularly in a reliable way. And this represents a significant milestone for a number of different reasons. It's the first in the world.
Yeah.
We've never before, as a world population, deployed optical terminals that are in use for communication between aircraft and spacecraft. It's a really complex physics problem. You consider the flight path of a spacecraft and the flight path of an aircraft, making the two intersect.
It's a bad math problem.
It's a bad math problem. And the concerns about jitter, when you consider that in an aircraft, there's a lot of things that move and vibrate and they can disturb the optical link. Being able to maintain a link pretty persistently is a huge milestone achievement. And I think what it most importantly represents is that the state of optical technologies is really mature.
Yeah. Well, why is this a significant milestone? Talk about why it's important.
So when you look at the use cases of Border Patrol, border monitoring, they deploy drones, manned aircraft, and a lot of defense technologies that are in use for doing that application. RF signals are subjected to jamming.
Yep.
They're subjected to interference.
And we've seen a lot more, certainly in the last decade.
Exactly. And we're going to expect that we need to do a lot more Border Patrol, border monitoring over the coming years, especially in 2027 and 2028. And during those time periods, we're looking for a solution that is resilient, robust, and can serve the needs. Because the other advantage we have using optical links is just significantly higher data rates. I think we're seeing, three significant step function changes there.
And talk about that. This isn't just a little bit of information. This is
massive amounts.
Massive amounts. And
right.
That's important. And how does that help someone who's flying the aircraft? Or what does that allow to be transmitted that maybe in the past could not have been?
So now we can go down the path of real-time streaming of a lot of aerial imagery at high resolution and look at a lot of sensor modalities in all together that can be routed over satellite. And historically, some of these links might have been more restricted. So when we look at the optical links that we're deploying on these aircraft, we're starting in at 2.5 gigabits per second. That's kind of the going in data rate that you get. And then from there it jumps up to 10 to 100 and then 400 gigabits per second. And these are just, exponential increases that aren't readily achievable in the RF domain, especially when you consider the physics limitations, having to go through atmosphere or needing to communicate to few GEO or few LEO spacecraft that are operational, and the contention that they might face. With the laser links, we get hugely resilient, jam-proof communications that happens at really high data rates. So not only does it allow for high-resolution imagery to flow, but multiple modalities of sensory payloads that can be collected now and transmitted over satellite, because satellite's the only alternative in a lot of these border patrol, border monitoring scenarios.
And so what's the next step here then? What do we look for next?
I think you got to stay tuned for the rest of the announcements.
But this has been the latest in a series of tests,
yes,
and that have happened over the last couple of years. I mean, should we expect to see more tests? Should we expect to see more this put into operations, more government contracts? Broadly, what do you expect there?
Yeah, so I think what you're going to expect to see, first of all, we've been running these tests for several years. We did space-to-space communications, so had our respective satellites communicate with one another. We did space-to-ground-based testing, so using our spacecraft to route data to ground-based assets. And the pinnacle that we've reached today is space-to-aircraft-based testing, which is probably the hardest of the three gates to jump over. And what you're going to see now is going into operational use cases. So we have a significant spacecraft deployment that's coming up in December or January this year. We're going to be deploying a large number of spacecraft that go into service and then build off the test campaigns that we've been doing to date to deploy operational services in both defense, commercial, and other use cases.
Should we expect to see more tests and more announcements from some of those tests?
Yeah, I think you're going to expect to see a few more announcements from some of those tests, but more importantly, you're going to get to see sort of now the operational deployments.
Okay.
Now, how are we collecting a variety of sensory data, routing it through our network, and delivering on our mission of bringing internet access outside of Earth so that we can still enjoy the benefits of it that we've been seeing here on Earth, but outside of Earth.
Talk to me a little bit about how you see Kepler fitting into this information ecospace or ecosystem that's kind of evolving and changing almost day to day. Where do you see Kepler fitting, and how do you differentiate yourself from so many competitors, and many of whom are here this week?
Yep. And so really our focus is on orbit space data relay. We're building a foundational infrastructure that we will enable a lot of use cases to both be better served today, and some new use cases that we never thought before will come into existence as a result of our newly developed capability. Where we focus our efforts is we are a interoperable open architecture. We really think that the future of the space economy needs an open architecture. It needs standards-based approach. It can't tolerate with a single proprietary terminal or proprietary system. I think that flies in the face of what a lot of nation states are prioritizing these days, which is sovereignty, the ability for them to go out and independently deploy their own space capabilities. They don't want to be tied into a single proprietary standard. So our continued focus on interoperability and open standard space architecture, I think, is really key to the market and key to what we're hearing people need, both on the commercial and on the defense side. So that's where we're going to be focusing the majority of our efforts and really deploying a system that's fit for purpose.
When you talk about sovereignty, because that's something everyone is talking about this week, and I think probably has been for a good part of this year, but I think it feels like it's hitting home a little bit more specifically here in Europe. How do you respond to that conversation? How do you say, hey, here's what we can offer here, and here's how we see this market evolving for Kepler?
Sovereignty is really a question of control.
Yep.
Right? So do you have the authority, the ability to control your own destiny? And that's really how we kind of distill down the question of sovereignty. Using an interoperable standard allows people to opt into our network or to use any third-party network. And that is really how we respond to that question of sovereignty. So we maintain SDA compatibility. We're working with the European Space Agency on their STOL standard, helping define that and making it backwards compatible with the SDA standard. And all those use cases, we enable people to kind of make their own decisions of, Do you want to work with a Kepler network? Do you want to work with a third-party network? And that's the benefit of an open architecture. And so they can build their own space asset independent of Kepler and have it still be a sovereign owned and controlled asset, and where their data needs are benefit from real-time connectivity and our internet-based architecture, they can route data through our network or through any third-party network. That's really our answer to the sovereignty question.
You mentioned SDA, you mentioned ESA. There's been work with NASA. What's kind of the next step with each of these agencies, and how do you see them working? How do you see that splitting up within Kepler? Is there going to be more of a government division? Is this more of the business can focus on commercial?
So I think the benefit of having a mission that's aligned to bringing internet outside of Earth is we really don't need to discriminate too strongly between the respective customers. We have an IP-based architecture where customers are able to connect in. They route IP packets. Like a traditional internet service provider, they're still responsible for encryption or decryption of their data. And we've seen that be resonant both with our commercial and our defense customers. And so they're open to working in that way because they're used to working with the public internet that we have access to today. And for that reason, we're seeing an equal interest between both commercial and government users to opt into our network. When it comes to a lot of these agencies, what are we really looking forward to? We're excited about the future of human spaceflight. What happens when we decommission the International Space Station? What's going to be the next generation future of that? And human spaceflight will require a huge amount of data traffic. That is a really exciting market opportunity for us. We're also really excited about the range of sensor modalities we can able to have their data delivered in real time.
That seems to be the key word this year, right? Modality.
Modality, yeah. I can use a different word.
No.
The range of payload data, whether it be thermal infrared, synthetic aperture radar, GPS radio occultation. You can choose your pick of any of these data streams that have historically been provided with a 30-minute to 90-minute latency. The number one issue that's top of mind for any of the end users and consumers of this data is how do we get the latency down to 5 minutes? How do we get effective real-time information access? And it runs across the entirety of their TC-PED loop. So their collection, their processing, their exploitation, their dissemination loop. So how do we enable our customers to the range of that loop to minimize their latency down to 5 minutes? And it's incredibly important when you think of whether it's defense or commercial use cases that are looking for real-time access to information.
There are seemingly going to be a lot of defense or national security opportunities in the next year, both I think in the U.S. and in Europe. How do you see Kepler being positioned for some of those? I think one that obviously comes to mind, there's a lot of talk with Golden Dome about, I think almost everyone's looking at that as an opportunity, and there could be opportunities there. I think in Europe there's obviously been a lot of talk about larger defense budgets there. How do you see Kepler navigating both those opportunities?
I think one that's goes quite understated is the Canadian defense.
Yeah.
So
let's talk about it.
Yeah, and I think it's important to talk about. So Canada just recently this year announced that they'll look to spend 2% of their GDP towards their NATO commitments before the end of the fiscal year. That is March 2026. Roughly $9 billion to spend. That has to be allocated between what is today, September 15th, 16th,
right,
and March 2026. That's a hard commitment to meet. And for them, they're looking for space domain awareness. They're looking for all sorts of capability that can bolster the Department of National Defense. And so I think that's quite an understated market in general. Historically, most of the space actors are the US and Europe, but Canada right now is making a significant push towards the rapid deployment of sovereign capability for Arctic monitoring needs, more specifically. And we're going to see that be a huge uptick. And so that's a little bit of a home court advantage for us.
Yeah.
We're Canadian domiciled, and I think that both breeds trust and allows us to access these Department of National Defense opportunities. And so to tie it into the broader picture, being a Canadian company, we inherit trust. That is the kind of Canadian national brand, and that is what allows us to compete on the national scale or international scale. So you see us have both contracts and commitments from the Space Development Agency, the US Space Force, and the European Space Agency. And I think that's kind of one of the few advantages that not a lot of other players have out there in the world.
So it sounds like maybe all those markets are in play.
That's right.
Next year.
Yeah.
Okay. And how about with this? I think the other thing that so many folks are talking about this week is the just shifting geopolitical environment. What does that mean directly? Is it that autonomy that maybe Canada or Europe are seeking, and that means new money and budgets, or are there other opportunities for you there?
Yeah, I think it ties back to sort of the three key points I've been raising a little bit earlier on.
Yeah.
With the shifting geopolitical landscape, people are looking for trusted sources, trusted suppliers. There is increasing concern over programs in the U.S. that might have a DPAS rating that otherwise interrupt the ability for that supply to flow to European and other partners. And in Canada, we have an advantage there. So being able to give people a trusted source that's reliable, that's what the shifting geopolitical landscape enables or asks for at this time. The second one is really sovereignty. So that's a question of control. By being an open architecture that is interoperable both with the SDA, the European STOL standard, that gives people the control that they're seeking, right? They're not committed to a proprietary closed source ecosystem that only they can, they're at the mercy of their supplier. And they want to preserve their sovereignty by having these alternatives that also enables their local domestic companies to play in the space, right? Because it's an open architecture, they can then incentivize their local domestic players to participate in it without having, the restrictions of a proprietary system. And I would say sort of last but not least, it's really the opportunity to provide real-time data that hasn't existed before. So historically, a lot of this Earth observing data has been provisioned on a 30-minute or 90-minute latency. The number one requested thing today from all these end users, how do we get this down to 5 minutes?
Yeah. And the answer is?
The answer is we're happy to help you.
I wanted to end with a question about some milestones for the next year. What do you expect if we're chatting next year in Paris? What will you say are hopefully some of the accomplishments from the end of 2025, most of 26?
Yeah, so I'll probably end up having to revisit this at the start
but that's why we have
the year. And so because I think we're not that far away from realizing the true vision of bringing internet access outside of Earth. I think I mentioned at the end of December, early January, you'll see our a completed operational system going out into deployment. There'll be a lot of fun pictures, content to share around that. There will be a few use case announcements that follow thereafter. So taking on from the early testing that we've done, that will go directly into operational systems. So getting a wide variety of sensors and data that are now flowing their data in real time that historically hasn't been possible before. That's going to come in short order thereafter. I think you're going to start to see, not just in the, the testing of space data going into operational use cases, some of these novel applications that we didn't envision before that were
the speed just accelerates, and
That's
you
right.
have to change the way you think about it.
Yeah, and so I think I tie this back to the original point I raised, which is there are a series of current problems that we know today that we're going to be solving. So how do we get data latency back to 5 minutes? How do we address some of the sovereignty concerns? How do we deliver a trusted solution? And so those are the known problems we're solving to date, and you're going to see progressive milestones that deliver against that right after the deployment of our network in the end of this year. You're going to have a few use case announcements that are solving those currently known problems. And then beyond that, there's the greenfield of opportunities that we didn't think were possible before, but now have become possible with the deployment of our network. An example of that is space aircraft testing. There are other example use cases that I think we'll also be announcing towards the tail end of next year.
Great. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it'll be an exciting
Great.
time.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. I appreciate it. Thanks so much for tuning in to Space Minds. We're going to have all of our content from World Space Business Week available at spacenews.com. And look forward to seeing you more this week. Thanks again.